Amazon. So fourth quarter, and by the way, absolute banger, great stuff. Beat by what, 20+% on the earnings line. I still can't get used to calling it LSEG versus Refinitiv. It took me like a year to get Refinitiv right.
Yeah.
So they beat on earnings, they beat on revenue. It's funny when it's like 170 billion versus 166. You're like, oh, they only beat by $4 billion. Like, remember how much a billion is, by the way, it's a lot. And Pat, they were in line on web services, and they had a really good beat on advertising. I think the company, showed the expected growth. It was, it was holiday season in it. They did mention some of their results. Another company that made some substantial cuts, 27,000 workers cut. But on the more positive side, strong revenue growth, and saw AWS grow and back in double digits. There is a theme here, Pat, by the way, now that we've done Amazon, Google, Microsoft. Cloud is accelerating again. Cloud's accelerating again across every company. Now, this is where I say, it's interesting because they got their fourth quarter revenue to $24.2 billion, which if you can quickly math it, Pat, that's almost $100 billion a year run rate for AWS. So, you're talking a really, really big number. But there is a question mark, because if Google Cloud's growing 26 and Microsoft's growing 30, is their market share being ceded? I mean, the logical answer is yes. The logical answer to that question is yes. But the problem is the construct of the cloud numbers is still confusing, because if AWS doesn't have the app side of the business. So there's some question mark. And I'd love to get your take on that too while we talk. It is down on a year-over-year growth. So when I say cloud overall is accelerating, AWS is double-digit growth, and they're growing by a lot. When you see 12, 13% to 24 billion, you're talking about billions of growth on a year-over-year basis. The other two, though, are actually annually growing year-over-year as well. So there's some market share questions that are going to need to be addressed. But I do still think it's by a long shot on the infrastructure side, AWS is the biggest. Just a side note about Amazon, you and I don't cover the commerce stuff as closely. It is really interesting, Pat, though, that how big the advertising business has gotten. Their ads business now is almost $60 billion a year, 14.7 billion with a mid 20% growth. I mean, if the rates stay this way within like 3 or 4 years, web services and advertising will both be $100 billion businesses, 100 plus. Like, ads will catch up. So really good result. I mean, positive. Street loved it. Absolute banger overall. Looking good. Pat, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, so let me just fill in the cracks here. It was a good job, Dan. So I want to focus on AWS profitability. So if let's start off, actually, let me dial it back. The biggest turnaround on operating income is literally, we saw almost a $6 billion turnaround in North America. And then internationally, we saw about a $1.8 billion turnaround, which was quite remarkable, which helped the bottom line, right? Because the year before, they had a net income of $278 million. Oh, they increased that by 10.4 billion to 10.6, right? So pretty remarkable. But let me point out some AWS. AWS may have increased their revenue, I think it was in the teens, but their operating income was up 38%. And that is just remarkable. And I also want to point out that AWS brought in more than half of the company's operating income. So company did 13 billion, they came in with 7. So it is the cash cow. It is feeding everybody. And I'm wondering someday if we'll ever see North America, International, and AWS all making operating income. I now want to swivel to some of the stuff that I thought was interesting that came off the call. If you remember, I think it was about a year ago, right? There was a lot of talk about customers looking to save money, right? Because there was this risk, some demand was down, and companies were looking to do that. So some really good signs. Andy said, hey, our customer pipeline remains strong as existing customers are renewing their larger commitments over longer periods of time and migrations are growing. So I take that as a we are back, baby. Okay. By the way, AI was brought up 40 times on the call, just for those who are counting. And hey, the chip story came out on the call too. And they essentially said Graviton 40% more price performance than other x86 alternatives. And they talked about Trainium Inferentia. What's interesting is they didn't talk about compared to GPUs, which I don't know if that's just a detente there, but they called it enabling an advantageous price performance versus alternatives.
Hey, we could test that at Signal 65. I would love to do some of that.
No, totally. Because it's one thing for a company to say it, it's another for a third party to say it. Couple adders here on the security side. Very rarely does AWS talk about gaining share, but or even saying superior stuff like that. But they came right out and said AWS's advantaged security capabilities and track record relative to other providers. I thought that was a harpoon that was sent at
that again. I want to hear that again. I want to make sure.
With AWS's advantaged security capabilities and track record relative to other providers, we see momentum around customers wanting to do their long-term generative AI work with AWS. Scud missile right at Azure.
I know. I was trying to hear where that was going, but that wasn't even veiled. Surprised I didn't just say it.
No, I know. And the final thing I'm going to say is, I wish AWS would just talk about how much, AI is layering on, improving their business. But they did say ultimately it'll drive tens of billions of dollars for revenue for Amazon over the next several years. Kind of soft, but I don't know if Amazon or AWS needs that. Dan, that is it. Any other ruminations or anything on Amazon?
I mean, no, I think, I didn't talk about it. I'll just point out in my online commentary, I did point out that I like the Bedrock strategy. I like the open approach, the multi-model. I think Amazon's going to be very much what Amazon's done with Silicon. It's going to be what they do with generative AI. It's going to be merchants. It's going to be use whoever else's model, use ours.
Does anybody not have that, Dan?
No, I mean, I think we've seen the pivot, but we definitely didn't. Everyone didn't start that way. But I also think there's just like a funnel, Pat. There's the funnel that starts with we have our own, and we are going to proprietarily lead with our stuff. And if you really want to, you can use theirs. They're, I think, the opposite of this. And so what I mean is there's two continuums. No, everyone realized it, Pat, because after the near hostile takeover of OpenAI, I mean, I think the one thing Microsoft realized they had something to button up there. But I think AWS has one inherent advantage, and that is the massive amount of infrastructure deployed around the world and companies that aren't going to move it.
Yeah.
And so all that data and all that infrastructure, there's going to be AI applications that are going to sit on top of it. It's substantial. And the ISVs that sit on top of AWS are substantial, and they're going to be building Gen AI on top. So having said that, no, there aren't, but yes, there are. So I hear a lot of testing opportunities. By the way, some economic validation opportunities too in there.
Totally, yeah.
All on the podcast, but if you're listening to this, like, ring the phone, man. Ring the phone. Let's help you.
Yeah, so it's one thing to make a claim about performance benchmarks. I would say that vendors making those claims, there's like a 10-to-1 ratio on believability. Get a third party to do that, like Signal 65. And then when it comes to translating the superior performance or power into total cost of ownership or total economic value, you should also consider doing a third party study, which I think, Dan, you might offer that.
We do. We do.
What's it called?
The economic validation. Are you talking about that?
Yeah. What's the official name of it?
I don't know. I have to ask
All
my
right.
team.
Okay.
That's a really great question. You know, I wish you'd have given me a chance to prep for that question.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
No,
it's
hold on. Let me see if I can.
it's being built.
Let me see if I can find it now because I think I shared it. Didn't I share it with you?
You
Share it
did.
with you, didn't I? Yeah, I'm getting a little old for this, but I think it's called
Yeah.
Future Group's Total Economic Value Study.